Welcome, Linda Lord here. This is part 2 of our storytelling segment. And today we're going to be focusing on the most important thing that you want your story to tell and what is the change that you want to see happen in your character. Now, when we talked last time, we talked about plot being beginning, middle, and an end. Depending on the kind of story you're telling and the genre that you're using and the art form itself, you may want to play with that structure slightly. So we talked about what I call writing to be read. So you're writing a story for someone else to pick up and read. Of course, that's not the only storytelling that we have, and it's actually not the storytelling that I do. I have written 2 books. One was a self-help book, sort of a journaling book called 31 Days Toward Maximum Living, where a question was posed and then there were lines there for you to provide your answers to those questions. I also wrote a book of fact and fiction, but I never really revealed which was which, called The Pitch, which was about the lessons that I learned about running a business while attending my son's soccer practices when he was a child. But those are really the only 2 books for reading that I've written. So I went away to a workshop in Santa Fe many years ago and realized that the kind of writing and storytelling that I prefer is writing to be heard. I love being in front of a live audience. I like writing for live audiences. Therefore, I'm a playwright and I'm an embodied storyteller. So there are a lot of different things that you can do with your writing and your storytelling. The most important thing, though, is to identify what's the most important thing. And some stories are driven by their plot. Other stories, like mine, are usually driven by their character. So a lot of this work that I'm asking you to do has nothing yet to do with putting pen to paper or sitting down to your keyboard. It's here. And I recently wrote a play that I held about 14 characters in my head and did the character backstory work that we talked about last time for each of them, and then created the relationships between them, and then was able to plot out the story from beginning to middle to end. And in some cases, the storyline started mid-story. People were already in relationship. People were already in crisis. They were not, once upon a time a baby was born. I just don't have that kind of stage time that I can bring a person from infancy up to the moment that we're experiencing them on stage. Now there's a really a big emphasis and a movement toward what we call 10-minute plays. And it's a different structure because you have to tell your story in a very consolidated way, where shows used to be 2, sometimes, my goodness, sometimes Shakespeare is up to 3 hours. Going from 3 hours to 10 minutes, that's a very different writing style that we're asking of folks. And the character work is different. As I said on the last segment, there's what we call postcard fiction. If you can't tell your story in the space of the back of a postcard, it's too long. So this is really important that we then focus on what is the most important thing. We could say a lot of things. We could tell a lot of stories. We could bring in a lot of characters, but are they central? Are they the reason that we're telling it? And as we age, we may want to just write our own personal narratives so that our family has a better idea of who we are, where we've come from, what are some of the things that we experienced and the impact that those had. Now, again, some folks are going to feel tempted to say, I was born on such and such a day in such and such a year, and just run their life. Even in personal narratives and writing our own biographies, the advice is to carefully select those moments and those experiences that best encapsulate what it is you want your audience to know, even if that audience is family. Our lives are incredibly interesting to us because we're the ones living them. But when we think about the person who will be reading or watching our stories, we also need to take into consideration the impact of how we're telling that story. So what's most important? What's most important to you? If I asked you, and I'm going to write down 5 things that you think you could write about that are very important to you, what would they be? You might put something down like your spiritual path, maybe your family, your career, your health, your finances, your world travels. Those are things that you feel very strongly about that are important to you. And that is the place to start, but we're not going to stop there. What's the most important thing you want people to know about your spirituality? What's the most important thing you want to share about your career? What's the most important thing that you want to share about world travels? It might not be the places that you went. It might be the thread of the rich relationships that you were able to establish. No matter where you went, you always seem to meet the most incredible people. Well, that might be them, and it might be you. Something about your demeanor, your personality, that makes those experiences happen consistently. Therein lies the story. That's the most important thing. So you're going to keep drilling down. Several years ago, I started using, it's actually a problem-solving technique, not intended for writing, called the 5 why problem-solving technique. So you have a problem and you ask why that happened. And you come up with an answer and you say, well, why did that happen? And for the most part, by the time you get to that 5th why, you've got root cause. So for the traveling example, it might be, I always have the most amazing experiences when I travel. Well, why is that? Well, because I'm a traveler and not a tourist. Well, why is that? Because when I travel, I want to immerse myself in the local culture. Why is that? Because I'm just curious about who I'm going to meet and what I'm going to learn. Why is that? Because I'm fascinated by humanity. Sometimes you need all 5, sometimes you don't. So what's the most important thing about my travels? My fascination with humanity. And now I know how to tailor the episodes, the anecdotes, the flashes of memory that get in the work. Does that make sense? I hope so. So take a couple of minutes, think about it. What are some of the things that you would most like to write about or speak about or perform?